go. Just remember that. Whoops, there goes another rubber tree. Whoops, there goes another rubber tree. Whoops, there goes another rubber tree plant.
Oh, yes, the Matt Kwasiborski show calling you live and direct from Washington, D.C., back in our nation's capital, as this is the Philadelphia Phillies 2022 for my Post-Mortem. As always, during the playoff season, we had brought in Harry Kalas's high hopes. Harry Kalas, the legendary Philadelphia Phillies broadcaster, and if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the aughts, you were brought in by that voice if you were listening to the Phillies on a regular basis. And Harry's a Hall of Famer, and that is a song that he would sing after every major Philadelphia Phillies victory, and maybe even before. This was the pep rally in 2008 of the NLDS, and may Harry rest in peace. And just trying to tune in this week, trying to get a little podcast and talk about what had happened in the past week, basically week and a half during the World Series. This crazy yet successful run by the Philadelphia Phillies that I had no doubt that they would make the playoffs. I wasn't sure that they'd make the World Series, and furthermore, I didn't think that they would have a chance to really win the World Series, and that's what we're going to reflect on. Before we get started, like I said, it's the Matt Kwasiborski show, tuning in, trying to give a little post-mortem on what it was like for me in the past week and a half up in Philadelphia, and kind of take you through it. And before we get started, thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. I'd like to thank all my loyal listeners out there. I really appreciate all the downloads. It's been flying solo a little bit the last couple of weeks, and for the last couple of months haven't touched on geopolitics, but all that is going to change, I'm sure, in the near future with the elections coming in the United States tomorrow on Election Day. But to give you a little history, I'm 47 years old, and this is the fourth World Series that I remember that I knew that I've been alive for the Phillies to be in. They were in the World Series in 1980 when I was in kindergarten, 1993 when I was a freshman, my first semester at Loyola University, New Orleans, in 2008 when I was living in Washington, D.C., but had to go to an office every day, and then 2022 living in D.C. for the last quarter of the season, yet during COVID can work from anywhere. So why I bring those up, because this was the first World Series where I could spend the entirety in the city of Philadelphia. When they had gotten to the World Series on Sunday 2 weeks ago, I just knew I had to be in the city of Philadelphia. I wanted to go to my old neighborhood of Fishtown, where I was born and raised, and watch many, many of those Philadelphia Phillies games on Channel 17, Channel 29, and Prism, and then eventually leading to the Comcast Sports Network when I would visit, albeit not living there. In 1993, like I said, I was a freshman at Loyola University. The World Series is not big in New Orleans. A lot of good baseball fans, but it's more the College World Series that is bigger down there due to all the talent of the LSU baseball team and the other teams down there in Tulane as well. In 2008, I was working here in Washington, so I could watch it, and there was a sense of there's a lot of Philadelphia Philly fans here in Washington, but I couldn't be in the city. And this time, when I saw they made it, I said, you know what? I'm going to go up. I'm going to go into Fishtown. I stayed with my best friend's mom that I've known since kindergarten and has become like a mother to me over the years. And, she let me crash in her house, fed me every day, wouldn't let me lift a finger, and just let me go out and enjoy the vibes of the city. And, on Friday, I decided to stay in D.C. for Game 1. Just had a sense of serenity and calmness that day. I did not turn on the TV at all. I didn't watch any CNN or any Good Morning Football. I usually watch CNN International and Good Morning Football during the day. Then turn to some of the afternoon shows and things like that. But, I don't watch that much TV on the regular. But just had a quiet day and just went around to the local sports bar here in the D.C. Woodley Park area called McIntyre's. And it was quite interesting, the reception. I went in my Phillies jumper on, and a lot of people were rooting for the Phillies. They're rooting for the Phillies due to the fact that they do not like the Houston Astros. Not like they like the Phillies. A lot of Mets fans and Nationals fans that were there, and especially the Nationals fans, because the Nationals beat the Astros in 2019 to win the World Series. I think it was the one right before COVID hit, in kind of an incredible fashion due to the fact that the Houston Astros were cheating the entire season. It was proven, and you could hear it during the World Series games. And what was amazing about the Nationals' run that year is that they won 4 games in Houston and lost all 3 in D.C., so the cheating really didn't help Houston all that much in that series, but you could still hear it throughout those playoffs. And I think that, to me, is part of the reason why I'm still upset about the World Series. I'm trying to get over it, and I think this will help me. This will help me get over it doing this little post-mortem for me. But the emotions of being in Philadelphia for the entire time, really, you really can't pay attention to much. Work is sort of on the back burner. I'm catching up with friends, I'm catching up with family, or I'm just relaxing in the city and just feeling the vibe. You turn on the TV, the local news. I usually watch the noon news broadcast every day. Sometimes I do in Washington and stream it. And just the feel of the World Series, the fans listening to the fans that traveled to Houston or that went to the games. You see people's posts during social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. It was just great to see the city be captured by what was pretty much not uninvited, but surprising run that caught us all off guard. We knew we had a good team all year, a team that did struggle to get into the playoffs. I think that caused a little bit of effect, but never gave up and played all the way to the final out. But it also played against a team that has a history of cheating. Not all of the characters on this team for Houston were cheaters in that way, but it really was hard to see the Philadelphia Phillies lose to the Houston Astros when my thing was all about, or my reasoning, or the part that upset me the most was the missed opportunities that the Phillies had in games 5 and 6. It was just they had chances to advance runners, to get some runs and to scrap things together, and they just could not get that clutch hit, especially in game 5. Or if they got a clutch at bat and a clutched hit ball, the Houston Astros were making some miraculous catches out in center field to McCormick, who made a crazy, crazy catch, a legendary catch from the bat of JT Realmuto. Kyle Schwarber had lined the ball that was rocketed down the first base line, and the replacement first baseman, Mancini, made a hell of a play on there. It wasn't like it took a long time to develop. McCormick, when the ball's hit into center field, you watch him run over and make the catch. This ball was kind of scorched and caught really fast by Mancini, who had to take the place of the injured Gurriel there, who hurt his knee and was declared out for any of the games remaining. And it was just, oh man, we're so close, But it was the times we would get runners on base with either 1 out or 2 outs, and what had gotten us to the World Series were able to get those clutch hits. The Phillies against the Braves, the Cardinals, the Padres were constantly coming up with 2-out hits, or they're able to advance the runner, or just be able to get that run home. And those last couple of games against the Astros, that disappeared against the Astros. And it was very, very disheartening because it wasn't like this Houston Astros team was that much more talented than us. They were the more talented team. They played, they had a little bit lighter of a schedule heading into the playoffs. And they played at home a lot more than the Philadelphia Phillies did, especially over the last month of the season since August 28th, where I think the Phillies were on the road 30 out of 36 days or games. And that can also take a toll. It's not an excuse, but, that sort of wore this. One of the reasons why I think this team wore down at Game 5 and Game 6. But Game 6, there was one at bat where I just was like, oh, man. And it was leading off the game. We're facing Framber Valdez, who pretty much shut us down in Game 2, which I thought was the only 3 times I thought the Phillies were really logistically shut down by their opponents, and that was the second time. The first time coming against Game 2 in Atlanta when Kyle Wright, the rookie right-hander, really shut us down. But anyway, Valdez had shut us down pretty much in Game 2, and then Christian Vasquez with a combined no-hitter. That was just a really dominating performance in Game 4 at home. But in Game 6, they had Valdez, we had Wheeler, and I said we're going to know if Wheeler has his stuff by the end of the second inning, and clearly he did. And in the top of the first, though, Schwarber worked a great walk against Valdez, and, it was fouled off some pitches, and it was like, okay, here's our chance to see what we have. And Rhys Hoskins comes up and just hits the first pitch for a ground out. I think it was a double play. And it was like, why are you swinging at the first pitch? You had seen the same thing with Castellanos earlier in some of the series. Harper would work a walk or, get a single or get on, and he would just ground into a double play on the first or second pitch. And those are the things where those guys, especially Hopkins, were coming through, and then they just went back into the slump. Just to give you a point of how bad the Phillies offense was in the World Series, they hit 161 as a team over 6 games and struck out 71 times, which is almost 12 times a game, which is a crazy amount of times just striking out and just not able to produce. Bryce Harper did produce. Schwarber tried to put him on his back, but after Harper, that lineup really didn't do too much. Stott looked run down. Segura looked kind of run down and overmatched towards the end. Marsh looked a little bit overpowered, and that's basically what I think. After Game 5, I woke up, so it was Friday, I woke up Saturday just not feeling, no, that was Saturday into Sunday. Hold on, I'm trying to think. Thursday night was Game 5. I woke up Friday just not feeling very well. I was like, this team is out of gas. I just don't know if they have it going forward. I did do a podcast saying I felt great with Wheeler and Ranger Suarez on deck. But I just thought that team, man, they took their shots, and Houston just kept catching the ball, and it was like, okay, it's really going to be hard for this team because they just were running out of gas. And you kind of understand that, and it kind of goes with following a mediocre team. The Phillies, for all intents and purposes, this year, they won 87 games. I don't consider that world beaters. Mediocrity is around when you win 50% of the games. They're a little bit mediocre. When you go 1-15 against the Cubs, Giants, and Rangers, but then you're able to take care of the Dodgers, Padres, Cardinals, Brewers, it kind of pushed them to have to play in September with their backs against the wall, and it was showing. They were slumping bad in the month of September. I don't want to say they limped into the playoffs, but it took them all the way to the last series, ironically, against Houston. The first game, they beat Houston to clinch it. And then they kind of relaxed and they took off in the playoffs. At one point, they were 9-2 in the playoffs. And they finished 11-6. They needed to finish 12-5, get to that 12 wins or 13 wins, and they just weren't able to muster that there. I really give the hats off to, first of all, Rob Thompson. I give the hats off to Schwarber, Harper, the bullpen. And for at times, Real Muto and Hoskins, and Real Muto's defense was phenomenal in the playoffs again, especially in the World Series. Hit the game-winning home run, then kind of curtailed after that. But at the same time, they were given all he wants, and it's really, really tough for a catcher. He caught every inning of the postseason this year, which was kind of amazing. But for me to be able to follow every game in the World Series was just something special. It was just something special to, think through the game, what's going to happen in the game, have discussions with people. What do you think they're going to do? How, meet different people that were Philadelphia fans, where they grew up in Philly, or they were transplants that became Philadelphia fans, or they were just there visiting. Met a guy from Chicago who just loved baseball. Remember, the Cubs win the World Series and came out, and him and I just kind of talked about baseball all night long. For one of the games, I talked to a local guy who was a college catcher, who was the understudy for Ben Davis, the Philadelphia Phillies broadcaster on Comcast Sports, who was a world-renowned high school prospect at the catcher position, and played in the majors, was drafted like 2 or 3 overall back in 97, so not that far removed from my age, just about 3 or 4 years younger. Just talking to him, I used to play catcher in Little League, and it was just bringing memories back. I walked past the baseball field. I used to play baseball and was a catcher, and I loved catching. I just really did. It was my favorite position in sports to play. I miss playing basketball. I miss playing tennis, but I miss playing catcher, and just talking to him, like, who was the best pitcher he's ever caught, kind of the scenarios of some of the major leaguers that he faced over time. And it was just really good just to go up and talk baseball with people, with baseball fans and people that were interested. And this Phillies run, unlike in 2008 and 2009, it came out of nowhere. The fact they were like, oh my gosh, once they beat the Atlanta Braves, nothing was stopping this team. Not the Dodgers or not the Padres. They just were not going to stop this team. And then when Bryce Harper wins Game 5 in the bottom of the 8th with 2 outs and just launches that home run, that epic home run, and then steps up in his very first pitch he sees in the World Series, at home, he does the same thing and hits a 2-run shot. And just, he really is the face of this franchise. I think Schwarber is a hell of a leader and is one of the faces, along with Bryce. And I really think Schwarber helps Bryce out a lot in terms of leadership and taking some of that pressure off of Bryce to always be the guy that people turn to, because Schwarber is the only one I think that's had World Series experience except Brad Hand. Schwarber won the World Series with the Chicago Cubs in 2016. He came up with the Cubs, so that was a special moment. Was in the playoffs with the Red Sox last year, knows what it takes to win the game and really just set the tone against this. Again, tried to do his best to set the tone against Houston, especially after a no-hit. In Game 4, he comes up with the very first second pitch of the game he sees from Justin Verlander. In Game 5, he smacks for a home run. And the Phillies had their chances against Verlander. They had the bases loaded. Early in the game, they could have knocked him out. He was going up against Noel. He went up against, as the bullpen game against Thor. Thor pitched really well for got them through 3 innings or 2 times around the order. I thought he gave up 2 runs. Thought he was pulled a little early. I thought Thompson was getting the hook a little too early towards the end. And a lot of controversy. Should he have pulled Zach Wheeler? No. Would it have made a difference in the overall game? A, we'll never know that. But B, I didn't think that was the detriment of the reason why they lost. They lost because they couldn't take advantage of the opportunities. Like I said, Schwarber gets on in the first inning, works a walk, and Hoskins swings at the very next pitch and grounds into a double play. You got to think about maybe bunting there. You got to do what you can to get the runners over. And then Schwarber had a brain fart and tried to bunt with 2 strikes out in the bottom. It was just, that team was kind of done. But overall, the bullpen, tip their hats to the bullpen. I think the bullpen is the reason they got to the World Series and got as far as they did. They're especially in games 1. They came in. The Astros were up to that big lead. Nola gave up 5 runs. It gave up 5 runs in both games, and the bullpen didn't give up a run in either game 5. Yeah, game 5. I'm sorry, I get the days mixed up. Game 1 and game 5 and game 2, the same thing. Wheeler struggled. The bullpen kind of stabilized it. They didn't really need the bullpen in game 3 with the 7-0 bombardment of Lance McCullers and the Astros. Game 5, again, Nola gave up 5 runs. Alvarado gave up a double, and he also broke down with he ran out of gas, not on the speed, but the location and the pitches on his location there and where he was trying to hit. And the Astros were kind of sitting on him a few times, and he showed it in the clinching Game 6. I do want to tip my hat to the Astros. I'm not going to say they're all cheaters. I'm looking at Altuve, Bregman, Gurriel. Those are guys that McCullers are sort of left over from that. But congratulations to Dusty Baker. No one else deserves it more than anyone on any of those teams than he did, managing over 4,000 games without getting a World Series championship. I remember his last days as a player in the major leagues growing up in the 80s. And just a world-class guy. He came in and stabilized that Houston franchise and was kind of the father figure they needed in a different approach. That was a very, very tough situation for him to step into after the cheating scandal, where the general manager was effectively banned from baseball. The manager was fired and let go, and some other guys that were player coaches that they did not get managerial debuts. Carlos Beltran was one of them. He has not been seen or heard of, I don't think, in the major leagues. And Joey Cora, who was suspended, was supposed to manage the Red Sox, suspended, comes back and gets to manage them. I think that was a crap shot. But the way the Astros were cheating back then, that was the biggest scandal in baseball since the Black Sox of 1919. And just to dive into what I remember about it, again, I was back in 2019, was back in the U.S., kind of looking for a job, transitioning away from my job in Prague, and I didn't really pay attention too much to it just because the Phillies were pretty bad. Under Gabe Kapler, they missed the playoffs. Bryce Harper's first year, that was fun. Good year. Let's see what happens. So the Houston Astros were basically wearing wires that would send pulses to their skin, and these pulses would tell them what pitch is coming. And how did they know what pitch is coming? Because they had either player coaches or bench players in the Houston Astros clubhouse that were watching on the game on TV. They weren't watching it live in person, but on TV, they were reading what the opposing catcher was hand signaling to the pitcher for what pitch. Then they would send the wire pulses to the hitter, and the hitter would know what was coming. That is stealing signs. That's one of the worst things you can do, but it was consistent. It was very consistent over time. And then when baseball sort of caught on to this and it was getting too hot to keep the lid on it or to keep the lid on the pot, Houston Astros, those guys would go to trash can lids. And you would hear these trash can lids and you had no idea what was happening. So they were doing the same thing. Whoever wasn't back in the clubhouse was monitoring what the catcher was signaling to the pitcher first, fastball, curveball, changeup, knuckle slider, whatever. And they would bang trash can lids to let the hitter know what was coming. And watching it, you thought that there was like something weird in the stands, like fans were bringing in, and this was the Houston's thing, was to bring in trash cans, much like when the Angels used to have like those plastic bats and you'd see them batting or waving the towels or whatever. But this was actually their cheating thing. And baseball swept it under the rug for the most part. Few individuals got penalized. None of the players did, which I think is asinine and just it's very poor. It's very sad. It's quality. And it breaks down the moral fiber of sports. So if you're teaching kids, yeah, you can cheat. You can cheat and get away with it. We'll find another ways. And teams are devising ways to steal signs or try to figure out what's going on. Now you see the catchers rarely give signals, at least in the playoffs, with runners on base. The catchers are doing the same thing with the electric pulses, except to the pitcher. So the catcher will have like this little box right above his right knee because he catches with the left hand with the glove, and he'll punch in the pitch that he wants. The pitcher will get some sort of electric signal in his head or his helmet or wherever it's positioned to know what pitch is coming. And it's really sad. It's really sad. And to me, had had the biggest scandal. That team should have been stripped of their World Series in 2017 and 18. They really should have, if there's proof that it went back back to the 18. I'm trying to see. I think they beat the Dodgers. Let's see if we go down. Of course, Wikipedia doesn't give you the world. There we go. So let's see. Never mind. It doesn't. It's. Let's see. Houston. Oh my God! Can't even see. There. Wikipedia gives you everything but a list of the World Series championships. So anyway, they should have been stripped of that World Series championship. Back then, because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they weren't stripped there. It's, you could say like about so the Braves beat them last year. So 17, the Astros beat the Dodgers. That's the only one they met. They lost to Washington and they lost to the Braves. But last year by the Braves, this cheating scandal was over. And if you are the Dodgers, you're a little upset about that, the way that it worked out. But it is what it is, and it's a shame that, hey, you can get away with cheating, you can figure it out. And the last time you see something like this on a team basis in baseball, you go back to the Black Sox of 1919, where 8 of those guys, the 8 men out, they were suspended for life for baseball. You could talk about Pete Rose, who got suspended for gambling on baseball as a player manager with the Cincinnati Reds. The steroid guys did not get banned from baseball, but first of all, they're individuals. And second of all, it's up to the Hall of Fame voters, and they're the ones that are kind of saying to keep these guys out. But they're sort of movements. So maybe we should let them in. We shouldn't diminish the rest of the crew while they're shooting steroids. They didn't need steroids to get to the Hall of Fame. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, or Barry Bonds. They didn't need steroids to get there. And plus, it's a little bit different of a story. But what Houston was doing was a disgrace to the game. Those guys were not raised to be cheaters, but they get to the major league level and they figure out ways to cheat. And it is really a disgrace. And it's very hard for me to sit here and say we lost to a team that has a history of cheating. Now, I don't think the cheating went on. I do think the best team won the World Series in the Astros. I'm really impressed with Pena, that shortstop, Vasquez, the pitcher, Framber Valdez, that bullpen. They just came in and just shut us down, like I said, in games 4, 5, and 6. And the Phillies, like I said, ran out of gas. But it's very hard to congratulate lifelong Astros fans. It is very hard to congratulate them because I do think that their playoff run in the mid 2006, 2015 and on is tainted. It's a tainted World Series. It's a tainted team for me, and they should have been punished. Altuve, Bregman, that whole team. That was found to be cheating. Not everyone on that team was cheating, but the ones like the 8 men out should have been banned from baseball and banned for life. It's the Matt Kwasiborski show. So moving forward, it was just very tough when you see a team like the Phillies, and it was a loving team. It was a team we could love. The personalities on the team, they really like playing for them. We all know that Joe Girardi started out as manager of this team. He was fired after 51 games in the season, 22-29, and Rob Thompson takes over for this team, and he goes. They win 8. He wins 65 games from there. He won 65 games, which is kind of crazy. Their schedule did get easier at times, but the September schedule kind of said, he did a better job than we realized. They beat the teams they should have. That was not the same with the Phillies under teams in the past, under Gabe Kapler or under Joe Girardi. They would struggle against the Marlins and the other teams. Yeah, like I said, 16 games against the Rangers, Giants, and Cubs wasn't very good. But they beat up on Miami this year. They beat up on Washington. They beat up on the Reds, the Pirates. They struggled a little bit against the Rockies, but they took care of those teams as they should have. And they looked like after Girardi left, and no offense to Joe, that they were enjoying playing with each other. They just seemed to just bond as a team. Another couple different aspects of the team that Thompson started playing the younger guys. That he recognized guys like Didi Gregorius and Correa and I forget the other guy's name, Familia and Odubel. They didn't really have it anymore. They didn't. So he started benching them and playing guys like Bryson Stott. Giving Stubbs a few more games at catcher there. Putting in Matt Verling a little bit here and there to either start in center field with Odubel. And then Dave Dombrowski changed the culture of this team for the better at the trade deadline. It was 2 moves that he made that you don't realize that made a big impact, but that was releasing Odubel Herrera. Odubel, to me, was sort of the face of this, him, Hoskins a little bit, but more Odubel was sort of the face of this rebuilding, yet we're not rebuilding Phillies from 2014 to 2020. Because I really think the things started changing. Well, maybe 2009. It doesn't matter. Odubel was the face of this. He was a Rule 5 protected player that we picked up from the Rangers, unprotected player, had a decent career. We signed him to the cheap. And then he goes out and strangles his girlfriend in Atlantic City Hotel, gets suspended for the most of 2021 season, and then yet we bring him back this year to be the starting center fielder. And I was just upset at that. I was upset at that point because we had Adam Hazley, Mickey Moniak. Mickey Moniak was the former number 1 pick, and Hazley was the number 8 overall pick. Hazley just had personal issues that he either didn't fit in with his team or just, he had to take a couple of personal leaves there. He was hurt a little bit here and there. But Mickey Moniak would have been the starting center fielder, except he broke his thumb in the last game of spring training, and that forced the Phillies' hands a little bit. I don't know. I just did not like the fact that they brought back Odubel Herrera. I just very hard for them to root, and I think there was a little bit of discord in the clubhouse with him being there. I don't know if Girardi had effect on that because he knew how Odubel played. Who knows what happened and why he was brought back, but I did not support that at all. They got rid of Juris Familia, who was a pitcher that came over who had domestic violence abuse on his resume. From what I understand, that it wasn't against his wife or girlfriend, but against his father-in-law. Not that it makes it right, but it's a little bit different than beating up on a 20-year-old girl, as Odubel did. And he just had a sucky bullpen, yet Girardi kept bringing him in, $6 million man, and he just did not have it. Then he makes the trade. He trades our number 1 prospect, Logan O'Keefe, who was a catcher, and catchers are the hardest position to predict how they're going to be in the major leagues, and trade him for Brad Marsh. And it was like, okay, and Brad Marsh was this center fielder who I thought was about 28, 29 years old. Here, Brad Marsh is only 24 with the long, shaggy hair and the beard. And it was surprising, but it was like, okay, now we'll see let's see what happens here. He goes out, Dombrowski, actually before he trades for Marsh, picks up Edwin Sosa of the Cardinals, who is a super utility infielder who came in, took over for the Ronald Torreses, and I forget the guy they had this year. It was supposed to be the same guy, but brought a spark plug. We're like, light bat, all glove. Had some key hits in key games, got us some key wins, and his defense was out of this world. Going forward, I think he's a great super utility guy, was used a lot in the playoffs, did get hurt down the stretch, but was happy to see that he was able to make it back because I thought not having him for the playoffs would have been detrimental with late inning replacements. Like I said, he picks up Brad Marsh, he picks up David Robertson, the former Philly, who only lasted 8 games with us, to kind of shore up the bullpen. Robertson, to bring the veteran presence, struggled, let's put it that way, but the couple games that he needed to get some outs, he was either pulled right away or he did get the outs. And then we traded with the other Rangers, Moniak, for Thor Syndergaard, the ex-Met who had signed a 1-year deal with the Angels. And they kind of had to bring him in because Zach Eflin was on the DL and Kyle Gibson started showing some wear and tear and looked like he was not going to be you couldn't really count on Kyle Gibson in the playoffs, and I think he only pitched one time, I think, when the Phillies were being no hit. So I think those trades, and Marsh really brought a glove. He brought one of probably the best center fielder defensively I've seen since Victorino. He covers a lot of ground out there. He has a few times missed plays, but I think a lot of that's just getting used to the different ballparks. He's been a career American leaguer coming over to the National League, but it wasn't like they cost him too many games, but he saved a lot of extra base hits. There's some balls that Houston was hitting and the Padres were hitting. Like, man, if Odubel was there, they weren't being caught. So I think his defense really came in hand. He had a few key home runs. He hits a home run against the Braves in the clinching game, the 3-run home run in game. Against the Braves, they had to win 5. So in game 3, first lost 1. Yeah, in game 4, he hits that home run. That's right, puts the Phillies up 3-0. Trade's already won. He's got us to the next round, beating the World Series championship Braves. There, he gets us to the next round right there. I don't care what Logan O'Keefe's going to do with the Angels. Nothing out there. He's not going to be winning championships or playoff games for them, unless it's somewhere down the line. That's in which we don't even realize he was a Philly at the time. But, it was great to see Marsh come in and just be a part of this team and going forward. But like I said, I think overall, the disappointment I just could not talk to anybody yesterday about it. I was not ready to do it. One of my best friend's son sends a video to me, and I'm like, nah, I just can't deal with it, dude. I still really having a hard time dealing with the missed opportunities that the Phillies had. Like I said, I've seen in the short amount of time that I've seen my Philadelphia teams get to the finals, I can only recall 2 times where I thought they were just overmatched. And I'm not talking about the Phillies in general. I'm talking about Philadelphia teams and all. The 2 times I've seen them overmatched are a long time ago. The first were the 97-98 Philadelphia Flyers, who went in sort of the end of the Eric Lindros era for him being a dominant player in Philadelphia. And they played the Detroit Red Wings, and they just got blown off the ice and got swept. Like, they had no business being on the ice with them. And then the Allen Iverson 76ers get to the finals against Kobe and Shaq when they're in their prime. They got dominated in that series. I know it was a 5-game series, but they just were no match for the Lakers at that time. The Eagles, when they played the Patriots in 2006, 2005 actually, they were in that Super Bowl. You could say the better team won. Talk about cheating, whatever. At that time, better team won then. The 2009 World Series, the Phillies-Yankees, missed opportunities. Very similar story. But this team reminds me a little bit more of the Philadelphia Flyers of 2010, where they surprisingly get to the playoffs, knock off the Boston Bruins, the first ever hockey team to come back down 3-0 and win 4-3, get to the finals against a very similar team in the Blackhawks and the Astros, the young nucleus, some really good young players and some really good veterans there. They were in that series, but the Blackhawks are the more talented team. So those are the teams that when I've seen Philadelphia get there and lose, that I just felt that this Philadelphia Phillies team had the opportunities, ran out of gas. We can say all we want about that last game with Zach Wheeler, but the 3 losses before that, Wheeler and Nola got blown out. Our 2 best pitchers got blown out before that Wheeler game. It was really Suarez that's kind of saved us, and JT Realmuto in the bullpen in game 1. that kept us in, won those 2 games for us. And that was a little disheartening to see Aaron Nola. But again, they played a crap ton of games. None of them had been to the playoffs before or won a round besides like Schwarber and Hand. Harper's made the playoffs with the Nationals, just couldn't win any series. And, that does play a factor. The Houston Astros went on to win 106 games this year. They kind of cruised to the playoffs. I know they struggled a little bit in the beginning of the season, but then they got put it on cruise control. They had home field advantage through the entire time. That does play to an advantage. And that's why when you root for a mediocre team, you see why if they could just, win a few more games to get that home field advantage in a series. The Phillies could have won more games than the Cardinals did, and maybe they played at home that series. Didn't matter in the long run. But then they're on the road against the Braves. The Padres have home field advantage. The Houston Astros have home field advantage. And those things, and they're on the road. Their September schedule was chock full of road games. They finished the season on a 10-game road trip before they started the playoffs. So, you could see how fatigue, and I'm not talking about physical fatigue, and it's also mental fatigue and emotional fatigue. Every pitch, every inning is just heightened in every part of the playoffs, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And they held in there as a team for as long as they possibly could. And just to be in Philadelphia for me meant so much, just to be around friends and family. And while a lot of them don't live in the city anymore, I still was able to catch up with some family members, some friends, just talk baseball, even talking with strangers at the bar. I absolutely love that, and just picking their ear, them picking my ear, and just, looking at it from a certain perspective was a lot of fun for me. Like I said before, in 09, 08, 93, yeah, I was obviously, like I said before, I was not in the city to watch it every single day. In 08, when the Phillies won the World Series, I called my office and said, I'm calling out tomorrow, and you know why. And then I went up for the parade, and the parade weather was 65 degrees on Halloween, much like it's been this year. Crazy weather up here in the Northeast, which is about to change this weekend, but still, it was just phenomenal to be there. Where your whole day, you're just plotting and planning the game in your head, and if we can do this, if we can do that, if we can avoid this and avoid that, I think we got a good chance. Like I said, even if we lost that Game 5, I like my chances with Wheeler and Ranger going into Houston and give the ace all we can. But they did. Very proud of this team, and they just never gave up. And the other thing, that the team was not intimidated by anyone. The only team besides the Chicago Cubs that dominated the Phillies were the Mets, and that will change next year. The Mets sort of collapsed as well down the streak, and they lost in the first round to the San Diego Padres with home field advantage in the first round. That was kind of nuts. That the Padres went into New York, and the weather was kind of cold and nasty, and won that series. And that, the Mets have a lot of work to do in the offseason. They did sign their closer already to a monster deal, 5 years, $102 million. Or 104, but I think it just shows that was the one team that I was like, I just don't want to face the Mets. Everyone else I had no problem with. Like I said, Atlanta, we played Atlanta 9 times in the month of September. We were 5-5 going into that, finished 8-11, but still played them tough. We weren't getting blown out by the Braves. Won the season series against St. Louis, won it against the Brewers, who were right on our heels, won it against the Dodgers, and won it against the Padres. And, it was that Dodgers series early in the year. They went out to L.A. And won 3 out of 4. And I was like, well, we might have a team here. This team's going to be contending. No matter what happens, they're going to be in there. To go to L.A. and to beat that team 3 out of 4 times is pretty impressive. And I think the microcosm of the whole Philly season was the bullpen pitcher, Jose Alvarado. Like, if you look at one player to say this was the Phillies season's microcosm, Jose Alvarado struggles in the beginning of the season. They send him to the minors, and he comes up and he becomes he comes up and he dominates. They send him up. Yeah, let's see what it says here. Yeah, May 27th, they sent him to the minors quite around the way when Joe Girardi was still managing there. And he was at 4.20 ERA in 64 games. But he just wasn't getting lefties out, and he wasn't in control. And something, he goes down to the minors, he comes back up. What's his name? Girardi's gone, and he just turns into this, stopper, like go-to guy. That was the first guy coming out of the pen for Thompson when he wanted to go for the win, and that was really cool to see him have faith in Alvarado. But then in the playoffs, I started seeing it against the Padres. I'm like, he's still throwing heat, but he doesn't have the control, so he started wearing down, and that's basically what happened there. So it's what a wonderful ride, watching these guys gel together. So happy to have Schwarber here for the next 3 years. So happy that JT, found his way again and became the best catcher in baseball. There's a lot of rumblings after he signed that 5-year extension that he is on the downside of his career. Wins the Gold Glove, by far the best defensive catcher in baseball. Handled the pitching staff well. And when Harper went down with a broken thumb for 2 months, he was the one offensively that was producing. Him and Alec Boehm were the ones carrying that team on the back offensively. Of course, Schwarber was good for the home runs every here and there. From the leadoff position, to watch Zach Wheeler be dominating. Like I said, Alvarado, Dominguez comes back healthy, pitches really well out of the bullpen. Did get hurt a little bit, but came back. It was effective. And just that bullpen in general, after the years we had seen this bullpen blow save after save. I mean, they led the majors with 34 blown saves last year. So if you take 2021, when you have stats that are that skewed, like, okay, you said if they don't, blowing 34 saves is unheard of for a team that won 82 games. I mean, think about that. 34 games were lost. Well, not lost, but close to being lost out of 82 wins. If they cut that in half, and they give those wins, they win that division going away last year. Like, Atlanta only beat us out by 6.5 games in 2021, and they went into the World Series. So if we had a competent bullpen last year, who knows? So it shows this team isn't far off, and we're going to look forward to what could be coming through in the next year. But tip the hats to them. Congrats to Dusty Baker and those other non-cheating Houston Astros out there that weren't on that 2016-19 run. And Pena, shortstop, phenomenal. The next star, I see why they let Carlos Carrera go and let him walk. And he's going to be a lot of fun to watch for them, both offense. He wins the ALCS MVP and the World Series MVP. So he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And yeah, it still hurts. It still stings. Even talking to you guys for 42 minutes and 48 seconds, it's just the missed opportunities. It's just the missed out. And to lose to a team like the Astros with their history, it's just really tough to swallow. But, like I said, they were the better team. There's no doubt in my mind, top to bottom. And congrats to Dusty Baker and his hardworking staff there as well. But you just knew the Phillies, if they were able to do what they were doing in the playoffs before, pretty much prior to Game 4, after they got no hit. Like, they were hitting with runners in scoring position, hitting with 2 outs, and just those last 3 games, the offense just looked a little sapped. And, going forward. So we'll see what the future holds with the Phillies. Some free agents that are coming up, player options. I think that there's rumors they're going to go after Trey Turner, who's the free agent shortstop for the Dodgers, who might get the richest contract in baseball this offseason. I think you see the Phillies bullpen kind of be reworked a little bit more, some guys leaving, and some guys coming back in. I think we may have seen the last of Gene Segura at second base, and it's not because Gene's a bad player. Gene deserves if we get Trey Turner, or we get Xander Bogaerts or Carlos Carrera, who's a free agent for the Minnesota Twins. If we're able to land one of those 3 guys, I think that moves Stott over to second base, and I think that's a great defensive pairing there. And Gene can take his kind of like Jason Worth, go and get your multi-million-year deal. Go be someone else's starting second baseman that can also help them get into a pennant. The Brewers might be able to use him. Wong, I don't think, is that good of a second baseman for them. The Giants could be a possibility. Who knows? But I'd like to wish him well if he does leave Gene Segura. He had a lot of memorable games, a lot of memorable walk-off hits, and just the enthusiasm And it's just, I don't think with him and the salary that he can command is going to be back, especially if the Phillies can get there. They need, I think, just another starter in that rotation. Either another three or a four. I would say an upgrade from Syndergaard and Kyle Gibson and Zach Eflin, who's now a free agent, going there. And if Zach does come back to the Phillies, I think he's more suited to come out of the bullpen. Could be that setup guy or that seventh inning guy, with his knee history. And he has arthritic knees, and when you have knees and you're as tall as him, you just can't bend those knees as much as you used to. He might be just good for, 2-3 innings outings, which means that not a mop-up man, but someone like the seventh or eighth inning coming in, or the seventh and eighth. There's been so many teams that have had setup men that could go 2 innings and turn it over to the closer in history. I think guys, Corey Knebel's probably gone. I'm not going to get to each individual one. But I think a starter, and they get a stud shortstop to put Stott at second base. And you say, well, Stott played well. He did play well. He played excellent. But I think shortstop is such a demanding position, especially in the major leagues. You need a stud shortstop really to win the games. We talked about Pena. We had Dansby Swanson for the Braves last year. The Dodgers having Trey Turner, the Nationals having Trey Turner. It's just that's such a key position right now. It really always has been. You go back to the days of Jeter and Garcia Parra and those guys, and it's becoming that focal point again. And the Phillies, I'm not ready for Stott to do that just yet. Not that Stott won't be one day with us, but I don't think the time is right for now. Put him at second base, take a little pressure off of him offensively, and see where we go from there. Alec Boehm, he could be a trade candidate, or he could be moving over to first base. I think, Dombrowski's going to test the waters with Hoskins to see what he can get for him. I don't think they're going to get, people say, oh, you're not going to get much for Hoskins. You never know. You never know about prospects. You never know about teams that want a guy who could be not a face of the franchise guy. That doesn't make sense. But someone that could come in and take the place of, one of their guys that are departing, or kind of be that veteran to mold the younger teams. He's a great guy for the community, great for the city. He's just defensively a liability. And if you, as I said, all playoffs, if you're not going to hit the ball, you got to catch the ball. If you're not going to catch the ball, you got to hit the ball. There's no two ways around it. I mean, you look at Castellanos, that's why he's a little bit off the hook. Not as much offensively, but made some tremendous catches out there in right field that kind of won games for us, either in the first inning or the last inning. He didn't hit well all year. But I think Hoskins and Boehm could be trade candidates. You're going to get more for Boehm than you can for Hoskins, and it just depends what they get in return or how they mold it. Love to see. There's the Japanese star who wants to become a free agent. He wants to play for the Phillies because he grew up idolizing Bryce Harper. When was the last time that the Japanese star didn't want to pick someone besides an LA team or a New York team or a Seattle team on the West Coast in Ichiro? So that will be interesting how the roster shapes up. But it's in good hands. We're in great hands. We're in great hands right now with Dave Dombrowski. I have all the faith in the world in him to do what he has. Look, he's coming in. He's lived up to his reputation. He wants to win. He wants to win now. Middleton wants to win now. And he got this, he constructed that team. And those moves at the All-Star break and building the bullpen, the trade deadline at the All-Star break, and building the bullpen and the free agencies got with Schwarber and Castellanos last year, and getting rid of some dead weight in Odubel Herrera and Fernandez and Didi and Torres and Castellanos. Like, those are altering moves that Joe Girardi wouldn't have been on board for, would not have accepted from a Matt Klentak general manager. So I do have faith that Dombrowski is going to do what it takes. And some of the moves might be painful. Some of the moves might be moving, like I said, in Alec Boehm. Aaron Nola, you never know. You might want to see what you can get out there for Aaron Nola, but you have to get something comparable in return. Not that I want to trade Aaron Nola, but he gave up 5 runs and gave up 10 runs in the World Series. That's more or less him learning how to pitch and being trained how to stretch his arm out. Because I do think this Phillies team is going to contend for a World Series in the next couple of years. I really do. And listening to the old heads on sports talk radio driving back from Philadelphia yesterday, they're like, well, you compare this team to the 93 team, or is it more like the 2008 team? And for me, it's somewhere in the middle. And also there's 6 playoff spots. in 1993, the Phillies stunk I started following the Phillies in earnest in 1984. I was 9 years old. They stunk for 9 years, like just bad. They had 86. They were second place team. They finished 21 games out. And back then, there were only 4 teams that made the playoffs. The winner of the National League East, the National League West, American League East, American League West. 93, the Phillies team they went into Houston. Houston was in the National League back then and swept the Houston Astros. And we're like, whoa, okay, this 90 team before were awful. And Houston wasn't a terrible team. And they led wire to wire in 93. And what that means is like they never gave up first place the entire year. I think they were like 35-5 at one point. And it was like, wow, this team is just, we just said, F it, let's see where it goes and takes us. Got us to the World Series. Team ran out of gas again. But then in 94, which was the strike shortened season, they went into the tank and they were no good again until 2006, 2007. And that was an anomaly in my opinion, that 93 team. There was a lot of rumors of them being on steroids. They started the steroid era. And you look at those guys, and some of those guys were jacked up. I remember seeing Danny Jackson just rip off his shirt in the clubhouse during the World Series. I was like, he looked like a professional wrestler. Dykstra was all bulked up. You know, it was just, okay, we'll see what Dalton looked a bit bulked up as well. Not that the reason they got to the World Series, but, and there's no testing back then. So anyway, I think that's an anomaly. The 06 through the end of 2011, that was something special. And that was special because they had homegrown talent that were the best ever to play those positions in franchise history. And what I mean by that is that the core of that team was Carlos Ruiz catching, Ryan Howard at first base, Chase Utley at second base, Jimmy Rollins at shortstop, and Cole Hamels on the mound. Ryan Howard's the best first baseman to ever wear a Phillies uniform. Chase Utley's the best second baseman ever to wear a Phillies uniform. Jimmy Rollins is the best shortstop to wear a Phillies uniform. Carlos Ruiz is the best catcher to ever wear a Phillies uniform. And until JT wins a World Series, Carlos Ruiz is there. I also think Shane Victorino, who was a Rule 5 player back then, second best center fielder to ever play. Maybe Gary Maddox beats him out. I don't know because I didn't watch Maddox play. But Victorino is a fantastic center fielder and was a great offensive player for the Phillies. When you have the best ever of all time at 4 positions at once, maybe 5, and the best homegrown left-handed pitcher for the Phillies, and probably the second best homegrown pitcher to ever pitch for the Phillies, that is hard to beat, and that's hard to top. And this 2022 team isn't as young as that team. They're not all homegrown. We'll go through the homegrown players in a little bit. But that 93 team were really a bunch of veterans that were entering in the last parts of the primes of the year or using illegal substances or so on and so forth. And they were just a one-shot anomaly. This team here, there's a lot of imports. The guys that you fall in love with and the guys you hate are completely different. We love Kyle Schwarber. He's an import. You know, Bryce Harper, we love him. Let's face it. There's people out there, detractors, but they're starting to go down a little bit. He's an import. Let's see. Segura is an import. You know, we have Zach Wheeler is an import. Alvarado, those guys are imports. Marsh is an import. You know, but they do have homegrown guys. Alec Boehm, drafted 3rd overall by the Phillies. Rhys Hoskins is a draft pick. JT Realmuto is an import. Sir Anthony Dominguez, Aaron Nola. So there are some homegrown guys. Eflin is sort of up there. You know, he's not homegrown, but we picked him up very young. I think he was a AA pitcher. We picked him up. So you have a decent mix, but your best performers are imports. And sometimes that's very hard to maintain that success with imports. And this team seemed to gel a lot more than the 93 team. There's a lot of selfish players on that team. But they were a lot of fun to watch. You know, very similar in terms of structure and, you know, power pitching, power bullpen, things like that. But a little bit different structure. So I think this Phillies team going forward will be in contention for the playoffs for as long, you know, for the next about, I'd say 4 or 5 years. I really think that window's still open. You got 2 stud pitchers in the minors that could be here as early as next year, Andrew Painter and McAble, that could come up and make an impact in either the bullpen or in the rotation. Most likely they are starters down there, but you know sometimes rookie pitchers are used differently. They're still very young in their career, but hey, we've seen the success with the Braves. The Braves bring up these young guys all the time. Look at Christian Vasquez, who came up and, pretty much he turned the World Series around with the combined no-hitter. I mean, he did. He tilted the series into the Astros' favor. And, I think Dombrowski is more apt to take chances. I think he just has a better eye. He's also not emotionally attached to this team as much as Ruben Amaro, franchise, I should say, not to this team, but to the franchise. Ruben Amaro Jr. was a longtime general manager who took over for Pat Gillick. General managers in the Phillies history has gone, in my lifetime, Lee Thomas to Ed Wade. Ed Wade was responsible for drafting a lot of that core that I had mentioned. Then they turned it over to Pat Gillick, who sort of was the Dombrowski at the time, get this team over the edge. And then they turned it over to Ruben Amaro Jr., who grew up in the Phillies dugout. His father was a longtime Philly, played with the Phillies in the 60s, 70s, coached them the 1980 team. Amaro had a hard time breaking up that core. I'm sure he did. I know they did. How do you trade, Chase Utley and Jimmy Rollins and Cole Hamels? I mean, they're not easy decisions because you're in love with that franchise. Then they start rebuilding. The Clintock era was an unmitigated disaster when it came to player development and drafting. And then you bring in Dave Dombrowski, and you see what it is. And he believes in what the Phillies. He wouldn't have left his gig, to come to the Phillies. He was supposed to build the Nashville franchise, which got kind of railroaded by COVID, obviously. But he could have been like, okay, this could be a 1 or 2 year gig. I'll wait it out. And you can't, dismiss the effect that Bryce Harper has on who he wants to play with. It was all long rumored that he wanted to play with JT Realmuto. Clintac went out and made that trade, and that we won that trade. No matter what Sixto Sanchez does, he's been hurt ever since he's been with the Marlins. We'll see about that. So we won that trade. And he knows that we're going to go out and get better. We all know that he loves Trey Turner. Will that happen? We'll see. But that's up to John Middleton and how far over the luxury tax he's willing to go, because you have to face it. This is a business. You don't want to have to pay that luxury tax, but some of those tax revenue could be offset by ticket sales and marketings and, other outside parts of the revenue that may offset that, to where maybe Middleton's not making much of a profit, but he's getting the team to win. And the future is bright. Like I said, I think there's 4 or 5 years. The one thing that concerns me next year going in again, you got to see what Bryce Harper is going to do with his surgery. Does he need the surgery? What kind of surgery? You hope JT Realmuto gives you another year like he did this year, the exact same year. We need another Gold Glove out of him, I think. We want to see improvements from Bohm. You want to see improvements from somehow Hoskins if he stays, Castellanos at the plate. You want to see what, Kevin Long, though, is a great hitting coach. He'll find out, ways to help with Castellanos. Maybe Castellanos was hurt. Maybe he'll help Rhys Hoskins. I think he'll help Brad Marsh. I also think you see Caleb Kaufman, the young pitching coach. He gets a lot of credit for the way those pitchers improved, especially Alvarado. He had a lot to do with that. Thompson managed the bullpen, but Caleb Kaufman, he was able to, coach them up, get them to the point where they're ready to perform at World Series championship levels. I wanted to do this show directed solely on the Phillies, my homage to them, the wonderful experience I had in Philadelphia, just to be able to be in the city for the very first time since I was in kindergarten. I don't remember when the Phillies were in the World Series, going back to my roots in my neighborhood at my age, talking to friends and family, and just being consumed by it. I got consumed by it from the Atlanta series, and it was just nuts. The ride they took us on, and like I said, I hate to say it, but the Philadelphia Phillies have averaged a World Series appearance in my lifetime. They've been in 5. I forgot about 2009 because they lost that one. In 93, they lost 2. But it's every 10 to 12 years, and I hope that's not the case. I don't want to be 63, 65 years old the next time they're in the World Series, or 58, I guess I should say. And I really hope that's not the case. Approaching the hour. It's a good way to go. It's a good way to send off with Harry Kalas once again, the legendary Harry Kalas, who will take us out of here with his high hopes for the last time this season. So, Harry, take it away.
So look around. Once there was a silly old ant, thought he'd move our rubber tree plant. Anyone knows an ant can't
was singing that all day heading into Game 6, just in the back of my head. Just woke up with it in the shower that day, walking around Philadelphia. I took a long, long walk through downtown Philadelphia, through my neighborhood. And, it's just, Harry, is sad to see him leave. And just a final story about him. He calls the 2008 World Series, and the Phillies win it. 2009, opening day is here in Washington, and I went to opening day. If they opened up in Washington, I took the day off. And I remember getting on the Metro and coming out of the stadium, and I got some missed calls from people in Philadelphia because in the Metro, they're like, hey, what happened to Harry Kalas? And there's a buzz like, Harry Kalas, like, yeah. And then I heard in the crowd, like, he died. Like, what? Apparently, I got to the stadium, probably 1 o'clock, 1:35 first pitch. And around 11 o'clock, 11:30, he went into his booth to do his prep and just bit it. Went out. He was destined to do one thing in life, and that was to be a baseball play-by-play announcer. He actually, ironically, started with the Houston Astros and finished his legendary Hall of Fame career with the Philadelphia Phillies. He was the voice that I grew up with generations. His son is a play-by-play broadcaster, Harry Kalas Jr., and Harry Kalas Jr. was at the Phillies home World Series games and probably maybe in Houston as well. And just never forget that. All those losing seasons, all those seasons where it's just dreck baseball during the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, and you just listen to Harry Kalas and Richie Ashburn and those guys. And that's who we grew up with, and the younger kids have bonds with the guys today. And I think that's great, but, there's nothing like Harry Kalas' voice and his enthusiasm and what he just brought to the game will just never be really, really matched. And he comes from that legendary time when baseball, you told stories over the radio more than you did on TV growing up, and he learned from the best of the best. And I'll never forget that day in Washington when he lost. And to go to the game, the Nationals did honor him with a standing ovation. Not an ovation, that's not right. A moment of silence is the right term, sorry. And I think there was a standing ovation too. I think they said, stand up, lift your caps for like a good 2 minutes in between the flyover, which you can't really reschedule that as much, and then the national anthem or vice versa, whatever it was. And I was always appreciative for the Nationals franchise to do that for Harry Kalas and honor him the way they did. It's been the Matt Kwasiborski Show. Thanks to the loyal listeners out there. I'll be back talking more football, basically. 8-0 Eagles. Forgot they won the game against Houston in Houston. Can't forget about them. And with the loss of the Buffalo Bills yesterday, to the New York Jets, Eagles are the number one team in the nation. And hopefully we'll get John back here on the podcast. But remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you. Have a great, great week, everybody. And we'll be on the road soon. And remember to go vote tomorrow.